Hi, this is exercises 104 through 107. This is wrapping up our sample management exercises that we are going to be doing with the UCAL4 program. We put them together just because each one of them is a small little function and we just wanted to address these. So I will introduce the topics and then please at the end of this just run through 104 through 107 quickly on your computer. Okay, so the first thing we'll talk about is that there are a couple of options in here when you're doing your sample management that are useful in very specific cases. One of which is sorting. So you can sort out your samples based on different sorting orders, sample names, for example, or other criteria. It's useful just if you've got a mismatch of sample names in your file and you want to present them in a logical order. You can also average, and averaging can be useful. For example, if you are looking at multiple repacks of a sample and you want to evaluate them both individually, but as an averaged sample, you could start with a file, let's say, that has 10 samples scanned in triplicate, so you would have 30 samples. You could look at the predictions of those samples individually. You could then average each of the triplicates into a file which had only 10 averaged samples, and you could evaluate the predictions or the results from that file as well. So average gives you an easy way to do that. It averages both the spectra and the lab values, okay? You've also got the option to reorder, and you can specify your samples in an order that you specify. So averaging, there are two different versions, one of which is by group. So you can do this by a group size. Be very careful with this and make sure that your samples are in order and in fact they are in the linear groups that you expect them to be. But in cases where your sample names are not the same within a group, this works very well. More common, I think, is where you've got the sample names that are similar or the same within a group. So you can average by group. I'm sorry, by sample name. Just a note that as with other places in the software, if a sample has a constituent value of 0, it will not be included when you're averaging the constituent or the reference values. In general, UCAL treats a constituent value of 0 as being empty. So if this is a legitimate constituent value of 0, if you remember, I suggested that you put in 0.0001 or 4 zeros or 5 zeros and a 1. If you do that, UCAL4 treats that value as a legitimate value and it will be averaged. Okay, jump into exercise 104 and you will see those options. Next one is 105. And really, this is an option to get rid of your deleted samples in a file. If you remember, when you uncheck a sample, you are deleting, you're making it inactive in the file. It's still present, it's still taking up space, but it is not going to be used for plots. It's not going to be used for regressions, for example. If you want to clean this up from a bookkeeping perspective, you can purge these samples out, and it will remove all of the unchecked samples from the file. Please note this, and again, I know we all of us that have been working with computers, have cases where we lose things that we don't mean to. Purge is not reversible. It's permanent. Once you purge out these samples, they're gone. So as a matter of course, it's a good idea to have backup of your files. And when I'm purging samples, one of the things I always do is I write those purged samples out. So this is how you can do it. There's another option that says store deleted, and this feature will write all of the unchecked samples to, okay? It's not going to purge the samples, but I would recommend that you use this feature before you do a purge. So if you go out and you say store deleted, you can write all of those inactivated or the samples without the check mark, You can write them to a file, call it wheat fall 2021_purge or whatever you want. Save it. Computer space is very cheap right now, and then you can go in and purge those samples out of your active file. If you ever need them, for whatever reason, that purge file is always sitting there waiting for you. So there's an exercise for that. Exercise 106 is exporting and importing samples. I introduced this briefly, but you can export your selected samples to a new file. So anything that is selected in your sample list there, you can export them out. There's an option that says selected files. Choose your destination file. You can give it a little comment, and away you go. Likewise, if you've been working with multiple files, you can import samples to your file and add them. It appends the samples to the end. So a couple of cautions about importing. Your spectral range and your resolution must match. If you're working with only one instrument type, this should not be an issue, but the spectral range must match. I would also recommend that it's best if your constituent names match, to the point that if you're bringing in a file and it does not have the same constituent names, and I would recommend that you go into that file and you add them before you merge the files. You will get warnings up, and it works pretty well. Every once in a while, it will recognize or won't recognize constituent names as being the same. You'll end up with duplicate columns, and that can be just kind of a pain to deal with. When you import samples, sample duplicates will be brought in. It does not distinguish, it does not recognize sample duplicates, so you will have duplicates in your file, so be careful about that. So exercise 106 will walk you through some options there. And the final one in this group is exercise 107. And this is just a way that you can manipulate your sample names. So it allows you to prepend or append some text to samples. Some of these options, I'm sure as you're sitting here, they sound, pretty silly. I can tell you that these options are used for whatever reason. If you've got, for example, samples from multiple instruments or multiple production lines within a plant, and you want to keep them separate. Sometimes you want to put in a prepend some text on the beginning of your sample names. This facilitates sorting. It makes recognition very easy. So you can go in and you can put line 1_ in front of all of your sample names. And presto, when you merge them into one great big file, it's very easy to distinguish where these samples came from. So likewise, if you've got some characters in there for whatever reason, you need to shrink it down to a certain number of characters or something, you can remove text. There's also the option to renumber. I think I've done this when you want to anonymize sample names, for example. You might want to renumber, but be very careful here because you really lose all the links to your original sample names, and you just replace them with some sort of a incremented sample number. So be careful here because the only thing that will be left really is your sample date timestamp to positively identify these samples. So be careful with your renumbering. And that's the end of this lecture. And if we look at UCal 4 again, and we go to our exercises, you can see that you've got different sections in your project manager here for the different text. Please follow along with the printout for each one of these and walk through them. But again, if you go in to one of these exercises, you will find the samples here, sample files, and you can see that we've set them up to follow the exercises exactly. And where you're going to find your information is in these areas, okay? So please jump into your exercise and work through these. And this will end the sample management. Now we're going to jump into constituent management and plotting. Thank you.